Hey there, gang. All right, I want to talk about two things here. The first thing is I want to relay a comment that someone made on a British guitar effects website. It was meant in good humor. The guy was asking me, like, because I was selling off some effects, because I didn't have time to sell everything before we left. I just threw everything in, packed it up, and then I had to deal with it when I got here. Now, our British friends don't buy as many effects as we do, or at least not as impulsively, but they are interested in them, especially the ones that are certainly hard to get. For instance, they have to pay like a 25% custom. So they have tax like we do, and their tax is a little heavier than ours, but then they've got 25% on top of that. So even if they could afford it, it gets out of hand quickly. So they were admiring some of the stuff I had, and they were like, dude, how did you get all this stuff? And I'm like, well, I've been doing this a really long time. But here's another thing, before I get into the second part of this chat, that's kind of important to remember. When I was a kid, one time, I was the oldest. So when we were off from school in the summers, I went to work with my Italian grandfather, my mother's father, and I adored him. He was the musician. He was my world. It was hard work though, because he was a contractor, climbing up scaffolding, like 3-story scaffolding with wet buckets of mortar in 100-degree heat was not a 14-year-old's idea of fun. I wanted to be on the ball field, but I was with my grandfather and he was awesome. And one day I was working on something and I broke a hammer. And I'm like, oh, damn. And I'm like, well, we should just go pick one up on our lunch break. And Grandpa was like, nope. He goes, I know exactly what hammer I want, and it'll wait till the weekend because I know where to get it. And I'm like, but we need a hammer. He's like, we'll get by without that hammer. He goes, you got to buy the right hammer. And I'm like, but Grandpa, he's like, listen. He's like, I had that hammer 20 years. He goes, the first thing I want you to know is that if you buy a cheap hammer, you're going to replace it 5 times before the expensive one, before the really well-made one. That's number one. Number two, he said, invest in your tools, because if you're not interested, if you're not committed to investing in your tools, you're not a professional. And he was not only committed, but he was willing to wait to get the right tool for the job that would last a really long time. And that's the attitude I take into my profession. And people are always like, oh, well, you're trying all these things. Yeah. Well, A, I can afford to because I've had a good career. And B, because of my grandfather, because I want to know that I have the best tools. And unfortunately, with what I do, I got to try them all, because you can't go to shops anymore and check them out. You only got like stupid videos that people pay for to like sell us stuff. And you can read through that pretty much, but not all the time. So I try everything, and whatever doesn't work, I sell. The tools that work stick with you and become part of your identity. They become part of your sound in our industry, and they're part of your character, part of your expression. So to me, I think of my grandfather when it comes to effects, and why I'm willing to spend the money to get really, really good ones, and even take chances on things that sometimes don't work out. Speaking of things that don't work out. So some effects just don't play well with each other. Why is that? Well, it may be impedances, it may be chips, it may be EQ curves, it may be, if they have modulation, how those modulations speak to each other, and what curves and vibes and cues they have. For example, the board that I was using, that I put together recently, that some of you have been watching me for a while know, I'll put it up on the screen here. This board was a 14 by 11 board. I put that board together because I wanted something easy and compact that was almost just grab and go, that I know would perform and I could take to gigs here in London, because it's really tricky carrying a lot of stuff, as we've discussed, on the tube or buses. So that board really worked. Everything spoke to each other. And the improvisation I did with it, that I put up the video, you can tell. It doesn't even have to be my best performance, but they're speaking to each other. They're working together. They're symbiotic. Then the board that I just put together this week, because I was messing around with some new stuff and I wanted to try some things, as boutique and Tony as that board was, it just wasn't working for me. They weren't speaking together. They weren't complementing each other well. And that's part of the process, right? Like, if they're not speaking to each other, if they're not complementing each other for whatever reason, you have to break it down and start over again. So just because you like one effect and you like another effect, and then you like another and another, and you start putting them all together and you think like, oh, I'm going to make this ultimate board with all my favorite things, it might not work. That's been my experience. You can take the best of everything and it doesn't work. You have to take the time and piece things together. And yes, you have to try it. People, in the audio business, Bob Olson gets frustrated. People are always like, well, what do you do in this situation? And he's always like, you try it, you got to try it. That's the only way to figure out if these things are going to work. And that's why I go through all of these iterations and all of these frustrations just to get to that one moment of perfection. Have I reached it? Yes, I've reached it several times in several different ways. And then, like an idiot, I take it apart and put it back together again. But at least I remember and know which ones work together and which ones work for me and the way I want to express myself. So I want you to think about that. Think about what my grandfather said about you have to invest in your tools, even if it means saving up. I know that some of this stuff is expensive and it's beyond the reach of us poor working stiffs sometimes. Like, you're maybe not in the business like I am, where it's 24/7 and I'm just, that's all I have to think about. If you have a regular day job, it's hard. It's hard. I know, I get it. Then save up and do as much research as you can, watch as many videos as you can, read between the lines, because a lot of these guys are not telling you the truth, or they're being paid to pitch you something. So, you can figure it out after a while, like what might work for you at least. And then try it. And as I've said in the past, buy from places. Like, I get buying used to save money. If you're sure about something, that's awesome. No problem with that. But if you're not sure, buy from a retailer with a liberal return policy. Like, a lot of places offer 30, even 45-day returns. Maximize it. Use the living crud out of that thing in all different permutations that you could possibly want to do with that device to make up your mind whether you're going to keep it. That's one of the true advantages of buying new versus used. Unless you used the product before, or you have a friend who has it so you can try it, then by all means buy used. Save yourself some money. I do that all the time. So that's my feelings on effects. It's an investment in tools. When I don't like something, or if something isn't working for me, or if I'm just bored after having something for a number of years, I just get rid of it. I'm not nostalgic. I'm not sentimental. Go. And then start over. That's part of the fun too. I love being surprised, like this Dabo thing that I've been demonstrating lately. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that that's one of the few expensive things that I knew really not that much about beforehand, but it was recommended to me by people I respect, and it far, far exceeded what I thought it could possibly be. And it's definitely going to be a staple in my arsenal. It's expensive, but just get rid of some stuff. All right. So if you have any questions, let me know. Invest in your tools. Don't be afraid to try things, and don't be frustrated if things don't talk to each other. Some things just aren't compatible, no matter how cool or boutique they are.